And we're in a situation now where people think that indiscriminate empathy is a virtue. That's Eve's sin.
Right.
See, Eve, literally, Eve wants to put the feminine ethos at the top of the hierarchy of value. That replaces God, right? And that causes the fall. And then Adam, he's such a cuck that's exactly it, is that he goes along with her. He doesn't stand up and tell her that maybe she shouldn't be listening to poisonous serpents. He doesn't. He consumes with her what she delivers so that she'll be his friend, because you know how useful men like that are. Yeah. And then when the fall happens, he complains to God that God made Eve and cursed him with her. That's the story. So it's not just women. And we got to get this straight. Women with their drive towards indiscriminate compassion, so that even the serpents are their children. It's men too who won't say. They always say, yes, dear, whatever you want. Yes,
Weak
dear.
men.
Weak men who don't help the women set boundaries. Now, you got to do that as a man, like.
The original tale that the Garden of Eden actually derives from the Sumerian Empire. They had a belief in a sacred garden story where a goddess creates 8 sacred plants and a male god consumes all of those plants and falls ill. She is so upset that he's done this that she allows him to be sick even though she's the healing goddess, and she abandons him and the rest of the sacred garden. When she finally returns, she heals him by making his ill body parts into goddesses whom help heal him. One of them was his rib. A goddess turned a male figure's rib into a little goddess, the lady of the rib, and that eventually descends to this horrific version that we have today in the modern Bible, where there's calls for violence, calls for acts on children, and all of these. I mean, we have racial supremacy added in, and originally these older myths were much less dark, much less violent. There wasn't any sort of notion of being the chosen people. That was all added later by different leaders. And so if we want to extract an understanding of traditional gender roles from these stories, I think it's more interesting to look at the transition from the Sumerian belief systems to what it developed into. And this isn't the only story. We also have the Cain and Abel story has a similar Sumerian counterpart. The Epic of Gilgamesh has Noah's Ark. All of these have their counterparts, except the later super violent, racist, later Moses stories. Although we do have part of Moses' story in the Codes of Hammurabi. They have sort of stones with the Code of Hammurabi, and we also have his origin story. There was also another baby in the Babylonian religion that was on a basket in a river that's found by nobility. So we can trace all of these myths for the most part back. And so if we want to sort of in a Jungian hermeneutical fashion extract our understanding of male and female roles, well then maybe let's acknowledge that these gender roles have been reversed in these new versions and corrupted. There have been goddesses such as Inanna, who is executed, goes down and descends into the underworld and resurrects 3 days later. Many thousands of years later, we have a male character that does the same thing. We even see, in that Garden of Eden tale from the Sumerian religion, you actually see the goddess fix the situation. The goddess heals. She solves the situation, where down the line in this ancient game of telephone, we have this very dark exiling situation. And the Babylonian religion, the Sumerian religion as well, have a serpent character that takes the plant of immortality. And so we have the snake character too. And we can see down the line how we go from that to the Canaanite religion, the Yahwehism, and then Judaism. And step by step, you see it getting darker, masculine, violent, depraved. And that seems to me a more useful observation than sort of trying to sell this idea of Judeo-Christian values that the Daily Wire seems to have given Jordan Peterson as a school assignment. It seems to be a stretch, because the things we see in the Old Testament are horrific and tell us more about the charlatans who invent and develop these stories and corrupt them than it does about reality.
Now, it's a totally different implication. The story is totally different, but what's similar with the Garden of Eden and this original Sumerian version that the Garden of Eden borrowed from? Well, both of them have the idea of an authority figure commanding you to do something, someone else either obeying or disobeying. And so what we see in the Bible, the God tells you not to do something. It's just an apple tree. Why not? Why not eat from the apple tree? Well, God told me not to do it. And so you have this temptation to disobey. You might see that there's no reason to obey. And when you disobeyed, there was punishment. So in both stories, we have someone disobeying and being punished. If we look at Abraham, he's told, harm your child. And God waits for him to literally obey. And then, okay, you obeyed. And I wanted to check to make sure that you're obedient. Moses is told to speak to the rock, and Moses strikes the rock instead. And so he's not allowed into the promised land for a time. Lot's wife is told, don't look back. She looks back, she turns into salt. So you see this pattern. When you're narcissistic enough to create religious stories to control the behavior of the followers of your religion, you have to create some stories that instill obedience. And so the lesson is, God told you to do something. You didn't do it, you're punished. God told you to do something, you did do it, you're rewarded, or nothing happens. And so these stories play this sort of role. And I think it's interesting to look into why the people throughout time who developed the later Bible that we now have in the Hebrew Torah and the Christian Bible that descends from the Sumerian and Babylonian religion, why they corrupted it so much, why they made it so absent of positive female characters. The goddesses are removed. Ashura, the goddess, was removed. You can see mentions of her in the Bible, but in the Christian Bible, her name is totally censored. And so we see even sometimes a female character will be later corrupted, like a positive female character will later on become wicked. And so there's this sort of transition towards a more male-focused, more violent, more political. There's a fusion between the military mind and the religious mind, whereas it used to be more separate in these older religions. You would see horrible political and military information, and then you would see these religious stories where gods are fighting, and it's sort of all sort of deity interactions. And then the Bible we have today, the war, go forth and harm those innocent people. We're supreme to everyone else. And this darker version of these stories that people are still harming people to this day over because they think that these stories are real.